should be connecting to platforms now through YouTube, Twitch, D Live, and whatever else. Today's going to be a little bit of a different stream for tonight, and I'm hope everything will go by smooth and there'll be no problems with anything in particular as far as that goes. So I want to make sure we have everything settled for that end of the things. But basically, what we're doing for today is I'm going to have a special guest on who also is a Twitch streamer. And we're going to be talking about Biden's administration and other topics relating to Biden himself. And I'm hoping that everything will go smoothly because most of the time, Discord gives me trouble when I try to do interviews. So I'm kind of crossing my fingers that we'll have no trouble for Discord. So I want to make sure we have everything going up as far as that end goes. So I figured I would just kind of talk about some things before I bring on the guest. We scheduled the time for about 7, so we have a little bit of time to go before the guest is going to come on, and we'll start talking about everything from that end. And I more just kind of wanted to do a live test just to make sure nothing was a little bit suspicious or weird for what was showing up, because most of the time some things can be a little bit weird. So we are going to do our live test. I don't know what I'm doing there. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and do our live test. I'm just going to test our video section here and make sure we are all good to go for video. It's just loading up. This is a very long video form, so I just wanted to make sure that we still got some audio up on things because, well, audio's a pretty big issue. So this is just some live coverage. We're going to skip around here. Well, I guess I should say what in particular we're talking about with this video. So obviously the biggest story going in for today is Biden is now the president of United States of America. Well, formally now president of United States of America. So now that that has been kind of settled, a lot of people are wondering what's to expect with a Biden administration. What are we going to see with a Biden Kamala Harris administration? Are they going to have more executive orders? Are they going to do police reform? Are they going to put more money in education? What are their motives going to be? Are they going to go pro climate change and try to put taxes on cars that they don't see justified for the environment? Blah 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 blah. There was many speculations as to what we should be expecting or thinking about when we're talking about a Biden-Harris administration. So, and I see they're all right. Hopefully you're having a good day there. And be interesting to hear your opinions of what you expect to see from a Biden-Harris administration. Earlier today, I was on my co-host channel, Ana Voltes, and we do a show every Thursday. And we were discussing about what we thought a Biden-Harris administration would mean for America, for basically what we were expecting from this administration. And the biggest takeaway we both kind of had was we see a situation of Obama being very similar to what Biden might be doing. And what I mean by that is I think they're both very similar type of candidates in what they do. Because both of these candidates are people that we both believed are going to be passing more executive orders than necessarily trying to get things passed legislatively. And obviously, executive orders can be a very good means to get things done, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you should be doing that, because executive orders can be overturned, as we also saw with Biden, because one of the first things that Biden did was overturn the executive orders that were already in place. He did 17 of those he overturned, and those included rejoining the WHO administration, which is the World Health Organization, and rejoining the Paris Climate Change Accords, and some other type of remembership joining, such as the DACA for immigration. And I don't know too much about DACA and the specifics of it to explain what that necessarily means, but I do know more about the Paris Climate Change Accords and the World Health Organization. One of the major reasons that Trump himself decided to pull out from WHO was he believed that they were a corrupt organization that was getting backed by Chinese money, or had you could say maybe Chinese motives, so to speak, and that is why he wanted to remove himself from the World Health Organization because of that. And those claims could be justified, because if you take a very good example of what happened from the World Health Organization, they were both candidates and people that thought about suppressing information, so to speak. And what I mean by that is there was an example, I believe it was Taiwan, where they were having some cases of this new virus, and they were bringing the information to the World Health Organization, and the World Health Organization didn't respond back by any real means. So they didn't really take the threat too seriously, or think about the threat as much as they should have, with being who the World Health Organization is supposed to be. And some people that may be a little bit more conspiratorial, or claims like that, could suggest that that is because of the Chinese motives, or Chinese influence in the World Health Organization, and wanting to back the Communist Party of China, and not alternative government points that go against the Chinese government and what they stand for. So if you take a generous claim about that, then I could see within reason why you might think that that could be the case. And it doesn't seem that far-fetched, really, when you think of it in that way. That being said, there's obviously many claims to Trump point out and causing potential problems, because one of the clear motivations of the World Health Organization and kind of what they were supposed to be doing, or I guess you could say their role as the organization, was to provide information and feedback to countries so that they could handle the virus in a better perspective and in a better way. Because especially when you're talking about a pandemic like COVID-19, you're talking about a virus that has spread across many nations and not just one nation. So the idea of having a World Health Organization, or a group of people that oversee the perspective and idea of the nations, not just one nation, makes a lot of sense when you're trying to tackle a virus that has spread overseas in really such a rapid way. Because once we heard about it from China, there was already cases of neighboring countries, and then shortly after, cases in the United States. And even there's some speculation of cases that happened months before COVID-19 was really known as the virus. And they believe, or some people believe, scientists believe, that this could have been a earlier version of COVID-19 before it really necessarily became the super virus it is today. So that was another thing that Biden did in his plans. He did a lot of other executive orders when we're talking about pandemic response, including a national mask mandate. And one of the interesting things about a mask mandate is the fact of what does that necessarily mean? Because as I was explaining earlier on my show, I don't necessarily think, or early on in the Voltage channel, I don't necessarily think that having a mask mandate is going to change that much. And the reason I say that is because the mask mandate does a couple of things. It provides feedback and suggests that people should be masked 100% of the time, and it will reduce the spread of the virus through wearing the mask. Obviously, that's the perspective of the mask mandate. And if you're someone that believes in masks and what the masks do to prevent the spread of COVID-19, then I think a lot of people in that crowd would be for a COVID-19 response for the virus. That being said, and what I was kind of saying on the show, and I guess to summarize my point on this, is the factor of I think people already have their mind made set on if they're pro-mask or anti-mask. And you obviously have the crowd of anti-maskers that will do anything possible to not wear their mask and even sometimes make a public scene about it, either because they get confronted by a person wearing a mask or because they want to make it known that they don't think that the mask help with the COVID-19 spread and virus. Now, if you take the opposite approach, somebody like Biden and people that agree with Biden's stance, and you could say maybe the pro-science crowd, in quotations, would believe that a mask mandate would do anything, would strengthen the stance of COVID-19 and suggest slowing down the spread of the COVID-19 virus. So, long story short, I don't really know exactly what a mask mandate is necessarily going to do, because I don't see people who aren't going to wear a mask just because of a mandate are now going to wear a mask. Because the only thing this mandate can necessarily do in response for COVID-19 is suggest the factor of making people wear their mask on federal property. And they can control that because the government passes its mandate or passes its law, meaning that the federal property is the role and the impact in something that has a narrative to it. And I think Ron Helton is there on DLive. I don't remember that sticker being there. So if you're there, Ron Helton, welcome. I appreciate you on DLive there. My YouTube isn't wanting to pull up on my computer here, so I'm only going on DLive and Twitch, although I think I am streaming on YouTube. I just can't read the comment sections because it doesn't want to pull up on my computer for some reason. So, that is fun. So, if anybody's watching on YouTube now, maybe go over to my DLive or Twitch if you want to get your comment heard, because we are streaming on those platforms and I have the comment sections up for those. Anybody who's watching now, basically the main question I have before my guest comes on and throughout this whole stream that I'm going to have is, what is your perspective of a Biden-Harris administration? What do you see them doing? Do you see them how do I say this? Do you see them being good or bad? I know that's kind of a childish way, but you kind of have to get that general question out of the way before you can really move on and tackle, bigger issues for what we're discussing for a potential Biden-Harris administration. And then when you get into the details of what we might be expecting, is what policies do you think a Biden-Harris administration is going to push for? We already know from a very early perspective and early viewpoint of the Biden-Harris administration, they are very much pushing diversity in their workforce. Biden and Kamala Harris for that matter, but Biden's cabinet members are an extremely diverse group of people. He has the first trans member, he has a black member, he has a gay cabinet member through Buttigieg, and many others. So his entire cabinet members are very diverse in their backgrounds and who they are through diversity standards and everything like that. And one of the early questions when you started to see that Biden Harris said that he was pushing more towards diversity was with Kamala Harris. He said first that he was going to hire or not, I don't know if hire is necessarily the bad word, but he was going to push for a Kamala Harris, he was going to push for a woman vice president. And then later on, you heard him talking about that he was going to push for a woman of color or a diverse woman, which I guess is kind of the same thing. And then you started to really narrow down your choices. You had a couple mayors, you had a couple senators that were on that very small list of people that media thought was good enough to be a vice president, but meet the quota of being a diverse member. And then he named Kamala Harris as his vice president. And it was kind of funny because going back in history now, which sounds weird to say, but going back, maybe even like 6 months or whatever that was, there was the claim of talking about him picking Kamala Harris, and conservatives were very shocked because Kamala Harris, one of her biggest things she had on the debate stage was her attack against Joe Biden, where she basically called him segregationist and by extension a racist because of his busing standards and him working with people that were segregationist, and many people thought they were racist members of Congress that Joe Biden was working with. And it was one of probably her biggest moments on stage against Joe Biden. And Joe Biden didn't really necessarily have too big of a fire back at Kamala Harris, and really it was a very big victory for Kamala Harris on that debate stage for many people, and the media thought kind of the same thing. So when Kamala Harris was named vice president, a lot of people were kind of shocked because basically he picked a vice president member, and if she truly believed what she said, then by extension he picked a person that believes he's racist to be his second hand in command. So that is very, very interesting. I see there, Hosier for Life, you state here, what can we expect following coverage by media? The people you just listed that will be his administration sound like quotas or diversity hires. He needs like X number of group or that because it's about optics. Yes, that's kind of what I was trying to get at here. And goes into my next point really well, actually. And thank you for joining on Hosier as well. But my next major point about this is, and I talked about it on my podcast, this was at least 2 months ago, on the hire of Pete Buttigieg for Transportation Secretary. And I just want to go off on a slight tangent here before I talk about my main issue. The funniest thing about Pete Buttigieg being Transportation Secretary was, as mayor of South Bend, his candidate ran against him because of the road's conditions. He had a numerous amount of potholes, and basically what Pete Buttigieg's strategy for these potholes was to cover it and with a instant repair or a very basic repair. Basically, all he was wanting to do is like what Domino's does on their commercials, where they're going to fill in the pothole. Now, anybody what knows anything about road construction or maybe even driving in general knows that by doing that, the road itself is going to deteriorate and is going to crack, and that pothole is eventually going to come back. The only way to really fix a road that is in bad condition is to tear it up and pave it through. So you have to basically rebuild the road or repair much more of the road than just a small pothole if you really want that solution fixed. So it was just kind of funny that Biden picked him as Transportation Secretary. And many people who are on the conservative movement for that hire also thought that there was many other candidates that were far more experienced on that issue, because Pete Buttigieg really doesn't know too much about transportation or doesn't really have a transportation background. And it is a very important deal. And people were quoting amounts of money that these cabinet members have. He has, I think it was like 400 million or something amount of money to spend as transportation secretary. It may have even been more than that. It probably is more than that. But he has a huge amount of money that he can spend on whatever policy he wants to make or anything like that. And for some people, that just seems rather stupid that you're going to give somebody that much money that doesn't necessarily have background or too much knowledge over the actual road equipment or transportation. Now going on to my main point here, and kind of what Hosier was also talking about. Many people, and I don't even think you really necessarily have to be conservative to have this viewpoint, see Biden's cabinet members as diversity hires, because he is looking to hire people of diversity, people of different sexual orientation, people of different color, people of different backgrounds to serve under his cabinet members. And like I was saying in my podcast, and I'll go back to that example on that hire, I stated this: it's very important that as a president, you need to surround yourself with people that are knowledgeable over certain viewpoints and certain perspectives of politics. That's what cabinet members are for. For anyone that doesn't necessarily know what cabinet members are, essentially they are experts, are advisors to a particular sector of communications or sector of government. So you have your education person, you have your transportation person, you have your money person through the treasury. You have you have these selected experts that sit on these positions to advise the president on what they're hearing in their community, or what they think needs to be a new policy, or what they theorize needs to happen to make for a better process. And every president has cabinet members that aren't always educated on particular issues. Many people for Trump pointed to Ben Carson as the position he served. Ben Carson being a surgeon that was able to split the not conjointed, I think is the word, but the twins that were joined together. And he was known for that surgery and is an extremely smart man. And he got named as the urban housing director, I think is the title, but basically urban housing. And many people were wondering why somebody of Ben Carson's background would you put him for housing and not something that makes a little bit more sense. So every president you can look back in has people that you think are a little bit weird or suspicious to why they serve in that particular spot. But going back to Biden and kind of what I'm trying to say here is basically, I understand the perspective of you wanting to include more people of diverse backgrounds so that you can get more perspectives than what you traditionally think. Because Biden is, well, an old man. And he has been in politics for numerous decades at this point. So he knows the establishment look on policies. And he doesn't necessarily know that much about maybe poor backgrounds or people that don't necessarily have the upbringing that he had in politics or in his life experience. So bringing in somebody that at one point lived in that perspective or lived in different shoes makes sense, because he's able to get different viewpoints and different policy suggestions that he probably hasn't even thought about before. That being said, you still need to be able to hire and to have people that are experienced to serve in these positions, so that you can actually have things that are pushed forwards and qualified for the particular perspective. So if you want your education person to be a hire, then you need to hire the best education person that you can, regardless of what color, sexual identity, or anything of their claim. Because if you truly are wanting to look out for Americans, you would think you would want to hire the best person at their job that would take the job as being a cabinet member, period. So a lot of people also have that perspective. Hosier here says 400 million, I would be happy with 4. I could live off of that the rest of my life. Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's ridiculous amounts of money that are in politics and ridiculous amounts of money that are in particular sectors of policy. So like you have, how do I say this? Basically, you could take any major position in politics and say that sector, like education, can spend this amount of money. That sector, like transportation, can spend this amount of money. And if you break it down, the entire government and how much the government spends is absolutely crazy. So to have that much money at your hands and not necessarily know exactly what to do with it is a little bit scary. Now, one thing to also talk about for cabinet members is although they are supposed to be experts and be basically head advisors to the president, they don't necessarily always have to be the smartest person at their job. A lot of times these cabinet members are people the president is wanting to work with or sees himself getting along with, and aren't necessarily like experts to their field. And these cabinet members can use professors or use people who are experts of a certain field to get their agenda done and to get what policies they want passed and so on. So I do think that also needs to be stated, because yes, cabinet members are supposed to be basically experts to their field. We still can kind of see the idea that they don't necessarily have to be the most educated at what they're doing. But you would think that you would want to surround yourself with somebody that at least has a lot of information to provide, or experience in that sector to provide, because they are the person that, in a large part, you're going to be dealing the most with when it comes to those different sectors of governments, such as education, transportation, and the real big thing on this new cabinet member and this new administration is climate change. And they're going to have, I think they're going to have a very big push at climate change and try to pass legislation on stricter government regulations for CO2 emissions or things like that. So we might be looking at some of those situations. I see Ron here buffering for some reason. I just catch the part you were saying. Going to load the audio. Okay, now, okay, good. The cabinet members are the head of the various executive branches. Secretary of State is the head of the state development and diplomacy. Biden, vegetable or animal? Just asking. That'll be a good question. Do you think Biden's a vegetable or an animal? Anybody who's in the chat? I know what Ron Helton's gonna say, but yeah, alright. Hoser says Trump had more women in his administration than other presidents did, and then you link me a New York Post article about that. And I don't doubt you at all, and for sure, I don't doubt you at all on that perspective. I also heard that claim as well. It looks like my guest is ready. We'll see what he has to say here. Everything's going very slow for me. Okay. Yep, okay. Okay, just let me know when you get to see my excellent typing here. One bad thing about this setup is I like to have the articles and where I'm looking at you for the camera, because we're about to actually show the camera. I set it up this way because we're streaming on Discord today and not the other perspectives or other platforms, is the factor of, I forgot what I was saying now. Oh yeah, so I have the desktop set up, and sometimes I feel like putting my webcam on top of the monitor kind of causes some buffering and delays, and I'm not really sure why it is, because if I set it on top of my computer, it's the same cable, it's the same everything. It doesn't seem to buffer as much. So if we start to see some buffering and delay, I might just have to move it to my computer. And I mean, it's not going to be that big of a thing, but it's just something that I find a little bit interesting. And you're asking, would you be willing to open the link? Yeah, 1 second. I have it set up on Discord here, so I'm not sure if it's going to pull through and show you, because right now on OBS I just have it set to the Discord server. But let me see if we can figure something out here. Let's see. But by the way, do you see climate change being one of the big things that the Biden administration is going to push forward? Because I do see that's going to be the biggest thing that is going to be pushed forward through here. I think that climate change... No, you didn't copy the article. I think that climate change is going to be the biggest effort that Biden is going to try to push. One of the big things also is justice reform, and what I mean by that is prisoners and especially non-violent drug offenders. There's been a big push in recent years to reform the prison system with the drug non-violent offenders, because they really haven't done necessarily anything wrong. So it'd be interesting to see if my friend Joe Biden, which is not much really my friend, but if Joe Biden is going to push forward on that claim or not. I do think it will be something that we should be interested about. And by the way, I saw that you joined the Discord. If you don't mind, you can post that on article news, the link, if you don't mind, and I might be able to pull it up. It's not letting me copy and paste it from here for some reason. My computer's doing something weird. Ron Helton says here on DLive, the Green New Steel is FDR's raw deal times 10, not good for liberty or the economy. Yeah, that's yeah, I definitely agree with you. I know that you are definitely not a friend of the Green New Deal or Green New Steel, as you famously call it there, and I'm kind of with you. I did a stream, and you also joined. I think it was the first stream on climate change, where I discussed the Green New Deal, and I also have a short video summary of the Green New Deal on my YouTube channel, the Breakdown with Birkenoff, and where I discussed the Green New Deal in just a very, very brief summary of what to expect. Let me see if we can't pull this up real quick. Alrighty, just bear with me for a second here. We'll wait for the New York Post to pull up, but just a real quick claim on something that is a small little rant to me. Is I've been watching a lot of Twitch streamers, because I've been trying to kind of figure out my schedule for joining back in college, and really I just got a very slow start for trying to do college, and I've been struggling to kind of get back into the mode from last semester, but I finally kind of figured out my pace and everything. So I think that I'm going to be streaming a lot more often from now on. But anyway, since I haven't been necessarily streaming that much, I've been putting on a lot of Twitch streamers and YouTube streamers and YouTube content creators and whatnot, and been doing homework. And one thing that drives me absolutely crazy is the factor of what people think about when they're like, okay, well, prove this claim to me. Did AOC really say this? And they pull up some sort of blog site, and then they're like, what? It's on a blog site? That can't be, then that claim can't be true. It has to be on CNN, or it has to be on CNBC. It's like the biggest problem is mass media, and that they're never going to show you those claims. Ever going to show you those claims. So, I mean, if you want to prove something, you have to use these alternative outlets to be able to prove your point, or you're just going to be completely stuck and not be able to prove your point. So that just drives me absolutely crazy on that factor. Okay, so it's not wanting to drag over. We're going to try doing this. Alrighty. Well, I'm going to try going through Chrome here. If we get shut down, I'll blame it on you. I'll blame it on you, Hosier, if we get shut down here, because it'll be overrunning my computer. Nah, I'm kidding. Hopefully it'll show through. I'm not sure if OBS is going to let it show through. Eventually I'll be able to figure out being able to show all of the screens that I want. But we'll see about this. Hosier says here, if it becomes too difficult to open, then it's okay. It's no problem. And you put guilty as charged. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. I should be able to put it through, but I'm still kind of trying to learn how to do all of this stuff here. You'd think I would learn after doing streaming for like 6 months on pretty regular basis. Definitely not every day, but you would think I would have a system down. But if I wasn't having an interview, I'd be able to just pull it up directly, but I'm not able to do that. But let me try something real quick. Okay, one try. I think I'm going to be able to figure this out real quick. No, okay. Come on. Yeah, no, it's not wanting me to do it. Yeah, sorry about that, Hosier. But it's linked to my channel description, or it's linked to my Discord server if anybody wants to check it out. And I could read it to you, but I'm not able to pull it out. But I guess I'll just read some of it to you. And this is by the New York Post. The headline reads here, Trump has more female senator advisors than last 3 administrations. President Trump has had 7 women currently serving as senior White House advisors, more than his 3 predecessors. At the same time, in their... Oh, I can't read that. Barack Obama had 5, George W. Bush had 3, and Bill Clinton had 5. The report in the Washington Examiner notes that the Washington Examiner notes that the president who served before Clinton appointed few women to top joints. Trump's record may be higher than that of any Chief Justice in history. So you get that claim from the New York Post, and it appears to be the Washington Examiner as well for another source, but that is linked in my Discord server under Article News if you want to verify that claim for yourself. But the New York Post is relatively a good document in my experience. It definitely has its it's definitely has its motivations are motives, but I think every mass media outlet has those motivations. So, oops. So we're about to pull in the guest here. It says here, that looks like the article. Yeah, they are silencing the truth. They don't want the public to know. That's why it won't show. Yeah, that's probably true. A lot of times, it's just every mass media source has its motivations and desires, or whatever else you want to call it. And really, that becomes a major problem, because they all want to cover they all want to cover certain things in their way and push their agenda. And that's something that is a problem, because they're only trying to push what they want to say and what they want to do. So it becomes very problemsome, because people get into this media echo chamber where they only hear the same items or similar items and not try to challenge their opinion. But yeah, I know there's some humor there, but it does drive me a little bit crazy. But we're join here and see if everything works. Hello.
Like, oh, here we go. Hello, how's it going, man?
Not too bad, yourself?
It's going great. How are you doing tonight?
I've been telling people I've been trying to get into the school flow of things here, but the first week was brutal. for me. I was struggling, just trying to get back in the flow of things, but I think I got it better now.
Yeah, I understand. I understand that issue, man. It has hit me pretty hard, as well. I was just telling my own chat in here that I was dealing with. I have papers literally every single week for the entire semester, on top of like a research project that I'm gonna have to do, on top of multiple on top of multiple like multi long ass papers. Oh, I'm sorry. Am I allowed to swear on your?
Oh yeah, you're fine. You're fine.
Okay, I'm sorry. It's your show. I don't want to. I don't want to step on any toes.
No, you're good. You can do whatever you want.
Gotcha. But yeah, really a lot of research, a lot of really dense readings. Yeah, it's been rough. I know your pain, man.
Yeah, that just sounds like a blast. I love school so much sometimes.
Yeah.
You're a political science major, right?
That is correct. Yes.
Yeah. I'm an education major here.
Oh, you're in it. Okay. Are you able to tell us where you got your education from, like your school, or do you prefer to keep that off the record?
I mean, I'm okay telling people. I don't really mind that much. I go to a public school, public college school, whatever, called Stephen F. Austin, or SFA, in Texas.
Oh, nice. I've heard a lot of about Texas and their some of their education really growing into their own, from what I've heard. At least in terms of political science, I've heard Texas's their departments are starting to become quite good. I think Texas has the president of the Political Science Association.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I definitely know that there's a lot of like bigger political science programs in Texas, and they're very competitive from my understanding as well, because they have like debates and such from their degree plans. Or I'm not sure if degree plans is the right word, but the people who are in that degree who go on debate stages and whatnot.
Yeah, this is what I was thinking of. Johnny Shiyama over at UNT. He is the leader of the Political Science Association.
And that's in Texas, North Texas?
That's
or Tennessee.
He's in Texas.
Texas.
He's teaching at UNT. Yeah.
Gotcha.
So Texas. Yeah. Really good stuff. Really smart man. Originally taught at my school that I'm at right now, which is Truman State University. But very smart man, very, very intelligent. So you're lucky. Texas is really starting to take a lot of the good professors.
Yeah, it's a big state.
What is it that you were wanting to talk about?
Yeah, I had several points. I guess we could kind of continue my conversation and get your perspectives on what I was. And one of the biggest things was, what do you expect from a Biden administration? I know it's a very broad question, but do you see what do you see as being their biggest push?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question? Your mic kind of cut out there.
I'm sorry.
I couldn't hear what you said.
Hopefully it works now. Basically, the question is, what do you see as being the Biden's biggest push for this next couple years?
Oof, that's a really tough one. So when you say the biggest focus, are you talking about? Do you mind if we try to narrow that down to foreign policy or domestic policy?
Yeah, we could narrow it down to domestic.
I know that. Domestic policy. Okay, well, I think The most obvious and most apparent issue that Biden is going to have to be tackling is the coronavirus and the subsequent economic recovery. As I believe that this is the first and foremost important thing to Americans presently is the ongoing pandemic and the subsequent economic damages and destruction that's been caused by said pandemic. And so I think he's already started to address some of these things. Like there was the executive order of the mask mandate on federal property, as well as the 100-day mask challenge that he was proposing. However, the effectiveness of the challenge, I guess we'll have to wait and see. But I believe the mandate on the federal property is at least a solid stepping stone. So. And in terms of his economic response to the coronavirus, there's that very large, substantial $1.9 trillion bill that he's, or $1.9 trillion stimulus package that he's trying to get pushed through. Obviously, I view that as much. I don't necessarily view that as a wholesale. This is a primary agenda. I view that more as a trying to test out the waters to see what he can work with the Republicans in the Senate. So we're just, and so then like what it is that the Republicans are going to respond with is definitely going to be is really going to determine how Biden moves forward with his economic policies.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely.
I hope that helps.
I definitely understand what you're saying there. Because one of the biggest claims I hear from the conservative side perspectives is that they don't necessarily think that Biden's going to get a whole bunch done through Congress or through the Senate, and more is going to be similar to Obama with executive orders and trying to push things through that way. Even though he has control of both, there seems to be still some doubt of trying to pass it through. I don't know if that's just conservatives being a little bit silly and they're thinking or maybe not understanding the particulars of Biden and what he's trying to do, but I don't know if you think he's going to be that way or not. I find it a little bit hard to believe, but maybe for more of some of the extreme stuff.
I'd say I think a big issue with that idea is the fact that Biden has made it so obvious and so apparent that he wants to try to do things through a bipartisan way. So I suppose he seems a lot more open to trying to work with Republicans in Congress. In terms of executive orders, we'll have to see. Obviously, he does have, or the Democrats do have control in the Senate and in the House. So obviously he's a lot more inclined to be able to push legislation through in that way rather than executive orders, because as we've seen from the Obama administration into the Trump administration, as well as Trump now into the Biden administration, what can be done with an executive order can pretty much be undone with an executive order. So in order to have more substantial and long-lasting policy, you're going to be more inclined to try to use the legislature. And given that the Democrats now have the Senate, with Harris being the deciding vote, I believe he's going to be much more inclined to try to use the legislature. However, the way that we'll see senators like, say, Joe Manchin, and like potentially like any flipping votes or anybody like that, we'll just have to wait and see. However, I think he's going to be much more inclined to try to use the legislature presently for what he can get through. And then obviously, as we've seen through multiple presidencies, is that we've seen like increasing usage of the executive order to get specific policies or acts pushed through. But I think if he wants to address a lot of larger issues in America, that he's probably going to have to address it through the usage of the legislature and not just executive orders. But obviously, foreign policy is its own thing, and because foreign policy, I almost treat differently than just regular domestic policy, because it's just the ways in which presidents have a lot more leeway in terms of foreign affairs than they do in as opposed to
Domestic affairs, yeah.
domestic affairs.
Yeah, foreign policy, it's its own ball game, really. It's you have to take it with a whole different perspective for how you even get things passed. Well, not even really passed, but what you do for foreign policy wise, because it's just more, maybe not even looser, but definitely different approach to how you have to get things done.
Definitely. Say, on one hand, yes, the president tends to have a lot more freedom in how they are going to engage with um, other nations in their uh, in their abilities to interact with other nations. I guess I know that sounds a bit redundant, um, but a lot of this has to do with just the general power of the executive branch and its ability to not treaties, but essentially like executive agreements that the president is able to work out with specific countries. Obviously, treaties are needing to be signed and passed by the legislature, but a lot of executive agreements are essentially, think of it almost like a promise, basically. Like I swear we're going to act like this, and this is how it's going to be. And usually, for the most part, Congress tends not to push back on that too hard. And obviously, in terms of military power, I don't see Biden changing or shaking too much up. Like, especially, like, we're not going to see, I highly doubt that Biden's going to try to go in and eliminate or like take to court the War Powers Act and try to actually get a lot of that hashed out in the Supreme Court. Mostly because no president has done it or has tried to do that since Reagan. So, well, no, I mean, like when I say since Reagan, Reagan was, I believe. Oh, you're calling me out. I'm calling myself out right now. So was it Reagan that the War Powers Act was? Hold on a second.
Yeah, I'm not sure who that was, so I couldn't help you there.
Is it me? Hold on a second. I'm so sorry.
Oh, you're good.
It was Nixon. That's who it was. Okay. Yeah. So like, but even since Nixon, presidents really didn't want to challenge the War Powers Act, and neither did Congress, because neither one wanted to lose their potential constitutional rightness in affecting how the president or Congress. Essentially, it creates a very large gray area that neither the legislature nor the executive wants to really challenge, because if they were to go ahead and they were to be essentially like proven wrong, then they would be, well, giving all of that power over to the other, and so both kind of have this almost gentleman's agreement not to address it. And so I think I highly doubt that Biden's going to be addressing that.
What do you
while
think
he still
about
has a massive amount of power in that regard as the executive?
Yeah. What do you think about Biden possibly joining more wars? Because I see a lot of people perspective thinking that Biden's foreign policy is going to be potentially getting into more wars, or at the very least extending what we are already in, as far as I think it's two wars that we're in now, or two conflicts. You may not even really call them wars, but two conflicts that we're in now. Do you see his foreign policy leading to more conflicts because of whatever reason you might think, or not?
I guess I would expect Biden to potentially be more apt to use the military in terms of responding to any particular national security threat or pressure. And this is obviously in opposition to Trump, who was more bellicose in his lack of using the military. He was much more apt to use like economic powers and like sanctions and trade tariffs and all these sorts of things. But in general, he was not as apt to use the military as other presidents, relatively or comparatively speaking. Um, so in that regard, I would potentially expect him to be much more open to the idea of using the military. He comes from a very this is such a large open-ended question. Um,
Yeah, it's a very broad question
he,
too.
I
I
believe
understand that.
yeah, he is most likely going to be continuing on similar or paths of foreign policy that we've seen come beforehand. Obviously, there is still room for difference in specific executions of foreign policy. Like obviously, like the decision to engage in um, a or to provide assistance to rebel forces in any given country, say like Syria or something like that. It's possible that he's going to. It's very likely that he's probably going to continue doing something like that. I highly expect him to listen to um, uh, foreign policy analysts and other groups like that, like Council of Foreign Affairs, people like this, um, other experts in the field, and as well as like his military leaders and generals. Um, so in that regard, I expect him to be following similar foreign policy as, say, the Obama administration. Um, Whether or not that means using military force is dependent on the situation. Obviously, uh, I find it unlikely that Biden is going to try to end the war in Afghanistan or uh, potentially even like opening up a new theater in any given country. It's possible, but it's entirely dependent on the situation at the time, and whether or not it is going to be reinvigorating or reinforcing specific norms that the United States tries to uphold in its international dealings. Um, so it's really going to be situational, but you can expect it to be much more similar to the Obama administration's view of foreign policy.
Hmm.
If I hope that would help. And obviously, during Trump's exiting few months, there has been a lot of ramping up of issues in regards to foreign policy problems that Biden has to contend with. More specifically, like Russia's continuing or campaign of cyber attacks on the United States and its infrastructure. Iran and its seemingly increasing belligerence in the Middle East, as I believe, has said that it's going to be leaving or just like not following the rules and conditions of the JCPOA, which is obviously going to more or less force Biden into certain positions that he's going to have to take in order to effectively respond to something like that.
Yep.
Whether or
Yep.
not we will see like Hamas increasing terror attacks in the region, um, well, I really don't know. And I think you have like smaller conflicts that are seemingly starting to flare up, but the effect of or the extent to which those conflicts will escalate is again very situational. We saw Azerbaijan and um, uh, Azerbaijan and what was the other one? John and Armenia. That's it. Their conflict over the past few months, a few months ago, conflicts on um, in the Kashmir region of India and China, and how we're going to be, whether or not that's going to see any more recurring issues. Again, we're just going to have to see. But obviously, one of the final things that Biden is definitely going to have to start to come to grips with is China's increasing expansion and its usage of salami slicing strategies. As they are extending their influence into places such as Africa and Latin America, I think is definitely going to be cause for concern. And as we've seen with the rest of Washington, seems to be the new point of focus, I would contend, or is at least the starting to mark a major shift towards focus against China's almost adversarial tendencies in certain areas against U.S. interests and influence.
Yeah, right. One of the biggest problems about military advisors, and I'm going to get to Ron Helton's comment here in a little bit, uh, about, I think it's rather funny what he said because he kind of put it more as a joke, but I'm going to talk about it serious and then we'll go to the joke. But one of the biggest problems about war is the factor of the money that's involved, and not necessarily that war costs a lot, which is a factor of politics and something that should be considered, but more about how much war makes people. And there's a lot of, not even, I hesitate to even say corrupt senators because it's almost like every person does it, so it's hard to say like everybody's corrupt if everybody does it. But then again, it's politics, so you could take that perspective. But anyway, long story short, there's a lot of people that profit from these wars, and most of the time there's speculation that these generals and military officials also want to see these wars continue. And going to Ron Helton's comment here, he was saying, foreign policy analysis, translation neocons, big money is made on those wars. Biden's family will be filthy rich, like Obama, from helping the war profiteers make more cash. Shakes my head. Guess what? The US, China, and Russia are always attacking or looking to penetrate each other's cyber networks. It is a huge game. So that's kind of what he was talking about on what you were saying, and just kind of a little bit sillier approach, but I do think that there's some truth to the factor of politics of money being involved in wars. And yes, wars cost a lot, but also it makes a lot of senators and congressmen a lot of money as well.
So yeah, obviously what that comment is really trying to get at is the idea of the military-industrial complex, that these wars are profitable for these businesses, and so therefore they're inclined to try to maintain or keep these wars ongoing. But I feel like an issue with that is, it's not that that's necessarily wrong, it's that that can be a tad bit reductive in how it's trying to understand the way that the United States operates. I think if the United States were to be operating purely under like economic, or like under only economic incentives, and ignoring the ideas of like geopolitical importance, U.S. influence, and its prominence and perceived usage of its power as the hegemon, and like norms that it's trying to reinforce, I think that I feel like you miss a lot of that, if not almost all of that, whenever you just say it's just for the money. Obviously, economic incentives are large; they are very massive. It's just that there are more reasons than just the purely economic as to why the U.S. would engage in a conflict like this. A lot of it we can see is are the ideas of nation building, of whenever you tend to, or if a country is somehow the nation becomes dissolved, whatever, what have you, the single most important need that has been found through numerous studies has been that security is the single most important factor in trying to reestablish some form of order in the nation, because otherwise you begin to devolve into militias, ongoing like small like warlords, and then you can oftentimes see the proliferation, especially in specific regions, Afghanistan, whatever, what have you, the proliferation of terrorist cells, and these can often come back to either damage the United States or its allies, and therefore hurting its standing in the region. And so, while the military-industrial complex critique is valid, we have to be careful in how we only view that as being the sole reason why the United States engages in these types of conflicts. It can explain to some extent why some of these things or these actors may engage in the way that they are, but I push back that it's the reason, the main reason why this happens. It's there are so many. I hope that helps to understand or paint a more clear picture on the overall idea of why the United States engages in specific forms of foreign policy. It's more than just economics, and it's more than just politics. It's a collection of ideas and issues that amount to something that's greater than the sum of its parts.
Right. You can never, especially in politics, never play with full absolutes. I don't think there's really any claim that is 100% true for any political decision, or especially when it comes to stuff that's so complex, as war is super complex, and conflicts are super complex. Because sometimes they even hesitate to call it necessarily war, because it's I like to call it conflicts.
It can be mids. Yeah, you can say conflict. You can say mids, like mids are like minor international disputes, minor intranational. I can't quite remember which one it is, but like they don't meet certain thresholds, or it's a conflict, but it's only being engaged in a certain way that doesn't meet standard definitions of war. So I mean, you got plenty of ideas for how this is going to be, for how it's going to go forward.
For sure.
But I think for sure, the ways in which the current administration is going to have to be dealing with, foreign policy issues is going to be really, really tough. Expect it to be very similar. And what was the second half of the comment that the person had mentioned? I believe that there was there's like a second part. First part was military-industrial complex critique, and then there was some other part, I believe.
Yeah, he added one more thing, which I think we also could talk about. Actually, we'll jump to this next question, and we'll go back to the second one, because this is more kind of relating to what you're just saying, and then we can move on to his previous point. But he says here, the U.S. government is not the world's rescuer. It causes and investigates a lot of the unrest on the planet. The government is bad at everything, is his last comment in referring to what you were just saying. So I don't know what you think about the whole idea that America likes to get involved and rescue, or at least help. And do you think that them trying to do that is helping or hurting?
Obviously, I believe the United States has a vested interest in what happens in other nations, because everything that happens in another nation affects what happens in our nation. If another country collapses, that's going to affect the regional stability and geopolitics of that area. That is going to then, in turn, have an effect on the way in which America is going to have to engage with these other nations. It could potentially affect trade, supply lines. It could give other countries greater influence in the area. So even so, if we start to see, even within a country, we see it transition away from, say, an authoritarian regime to a more democratic one, that would greatly affect the way that the United States is going to have to diplomatically engage with these other nations. Could you repeat the second half of that? I'm sorry. I'm trying to I've got my chat here too, and I'm trying to talk to you and to your chat, and also read mine.
Oh no, I understand. I'm bouncing around as well. The second half.
I'm trying to keep up with it.
Yeah, the second half. I was telling people earlier. I'm hope the Discord works, because one time an interview was total crap because the audio was all over the place and everything. So I'm like, well, I hope it works this time. Anyway, but his second half of the question was, you kind of answered it, but basically his second half was the factor of that he thinks the U.S. being involved in these foreign affairs, I'm kind of summarizing it, in foreign affairs is causing more issues than helping. And I think you kind of answered that. So
Yeah, it can. Depends which issue specifically are you causing, or is it causing? Are there any benefits being gained from the United States being in this particular conflict, or not engaging with this conflict? There are so many multivariate factors that you could try to look through. When we say in general it's causing more problems, is it further destabilizing a nation? And if so, we need to ask ourselves, okay, if it is destabilizing this area, why are you trying to, are we destabilizing it? Is it in order to grant people a greater level of freedom? Is it in order to prevent some abuse of human rights, such as genocide? Um, uh, so like in that case, I would imagine this person would probably be more okay with a destabilizing factor, as opposed to, like, say, this nation decided to vote for a particular candidate and then we decided to bomb them because we don't like them. Like, there are these these particular actions don't exist in a vacuum, and they have so many knock-on effects, that will attempt to that can describe the ways in which these different nations are, um, or that can attempt to help explain the utility, the effectiveness of the United States' intervention. Um, I guess depending on how, to what extent you declaim an intervention to be, whether it's simply like just economic sanctions, or if it's just has to be military boots on the ground. Um, that can greatly affect your um, that can greatly affect the ways in which that you're trying to understand how the utility and the function of what's happening. Obviously, it becomes very difficult whenever you start to argue against counterfactuals, like what would happen if the U.S. did X instead of Y. You can never truly know. It's going to be pure conjecture, and you can try with the best to make a prediction, but I think especially if you try to go into longer term effects over or on a country, you're just going to be it starts to lose a lot of its credibility and its utility in explaining nationwide behavior. So, I mean, it's all relative, I guess. uh, is it
yeah,
detrimental to the U.S.? Is it detrimental to its allies? Is it detrimental to specific people in the U.S.? Is it detrimental to the United States' standings in the international system? Or, like, there's so many ways in which you have to try to understand and analyze the effectiveness or the ineffectiveness of a particular engagement. And obviously, depending on the engagement that this person is talking about, we can more effectively say that was good, that was bad. But I think just in general, this is how you need to approach a lot of these ideas.
yeah. As we were saying before, and I think this just needs to be stated clearly. I don't think there's one solution that says everything, and it's an easy way out to say, well, you have to look at it case by case. But especially when it comes to foreign affairs and even domestic affairs, it really is a case by case basis if you want to be the best for each scenario. You can't just use a broad brush and solve everything when it comes to politics.
Obviously, we like to have specific, or whenever we engage with foreign policy, and this is something that I'll talk about on my stream several times, is that when we engage in foreign policy, oftentimes we will start with specific assumptions in mind, um, on both the best way to interact with other nations as well as how other nations are going to interact with us, and how these particular interactions are going to cross and meet together. So obviously, a large amount of people who engage in IR politics are going to be, you're going to find a lot of institutionalists who are I'm sure you've probably heard of this at some point, but rational choice, and that nations are essentially going to be trying to maximize their self-interest. Every single nation is going to be trying. This is their general goal: is get what's the best for them. Obviously, that doesn't always mean that they're always pursuing the maximum utility, but they may be just satisficing through a variety of heuristic tools that is its own entire college class that I would be able to get into at some other point if you want me to. But essentially, the United States is going to be engaging in certain policy decisions, oftentimes as they're being informed by different modes of thought and reasoning, and that being that presently rational choice tends to still dominate, and that nations seek to maximize their own utilities. So, and because of that, the United States is going to act in specific ways, and usually other nations will oftentimes act in accordance to the ideas of rational choice. Very often, if not all the time, depending on the extent that you're trying to talk about foreign policy and individual people. Again, rational choice is literally its own school of thought in political science. So it has a lot of defenders and it has a lot of critics. But yeah, I hope that tries to explain a lot of it. So it's not that like the United States is going to be fundamentally changing the way that it engages, but rather, I believe a lot of the assumptions that we're going into these particular decisions are pretty much always the same, if not oftentimes the same, depending on, like who individual members of different cabinets or departments are talking to, who they're going to for information. What are the bureaucrats' information that they're bringing up the chain of command to be presented to the president. It's a fundamentally massive system. Even when you're just looking at government, it's a fucking sprawling system of interactions, and then you have to start incorporating literally every other nation on the world into that, and it becomes really, really complex. But in summary, rational choice are the assumptions that we bring in our foreign policy, and that in turn informs how we should engage and interact with other nations.
Right, yeah. I definitely...
And that's why you tend to see a lot of similar styles of foreign policy.
Yeah, you definitely described that situation well. And he hasn't replied for his particular example or anything off of what you were saying. So, knowing him relatively well, because he's pretty regularly on my streams when I used to do it all the time, is he's very anti-war and anti-conflict. And I don't necessarily want to put words in his mouth, but he very much sees any sort of conflict or extension on foreign policy as a bad thing, because he thinks America not necessarily just needs to take care of itself, but doesn't really need to be involved. It doesn't need to be like that what's the word? Not CP, is it CPS? But when you have like the person that watches over a daycare worker, I guess you could say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, obviously the issue with that is that the United States has certain norms and ideas that it wishes to see be reinforced. Obviously, to varying degrees, the U.S. will actually try to reinforce them. And a lot of that has to do with, like, the relative power of individual states or nations. So, like, for instance, the United States is much more willing to go into and assert certain norms over a nation like Syria than it is, say, China, and obviously I would contend that the idea that all military usage is somehow wrong or bad, oftentimes is going to be against the idea of like human rights and like R2P, responsibility to protect. And that is essentially that nations are compelled, as it's a shared idea that genocide is wrong. So if like the EU or the EU, if the UN were to say that a genocide is ongoing, nations have an obligation to halt or stop the regime from continuing such campaign against civilian or non-aggressive population. So, and I would contend that it's a very normative claim for sure. And obviously, a realist would probably and ultimately say, no, don't get involved. Wait for other people to do it, and then you get the free rider problem. But these, I feel like the idea that the U.S. shouldn't use any military force is a bit absurd, especially if you want to see the best potential for the United States happen. Obviously, having using the military to patrol for pirates or other raiding parties in and around like the Strait of Hormuz or any place like that could be a potential issue, or it is not an issue. I would contend is probably a good thing. Protecting trading and shipping lanes. And obviously, like the prevention the prevention or the halting of genocide is an optimal usage of the military, I would say. Obviously, if he's talking about like just sheer regime change, I wouldn't be. I would also say like I'm not a fan of that. I think that it's really not good, especially in recent decades. Regime change has really shown itself to be extremely ineffective. So I suppose if that's the contention, is that going in and affecting regime change with like boots on the ground, I would totally agree. Very, very bad idea. Not good. Don't support it. But obviously, you say you don't want to put words in his mouth. But military power is highly fungible. It allows for the United States to get a lot more of what it wants. It has a lot more say in international politics because of its large military force, and the ways in which it attempts to, the ways in which this power is fungible extends to far more than even just like we can put boots on the ground and overthrow a regime. So there's a whole lot there, I guess.
Yeah, I think you explained it pretty well. That of numerous factors of why we'd like to get involved in these conflicts. For even if you take the most like general perspective of it, like the most omniscient perspective, where you kind of just look over everything and try not to have any bias. I do think you explained from a foreign policy perspective on that end. I think a lot of people that take that position, and sometimes I even favor the position he has, are people that want to see a better world where we don't really have to get involved, but there are consequences for if we don't in a lot of ways. I don't know a whole bunch about foreign policy. It's something I want to look more into to get a more understanding in particular. But it's a lot more complex than just taking a very general approach on what to do for foreign policy's sake.
And so something that I'm just trying to write here is like something that is obviously recognized is that the consequences of any given action are relatively unknown, especially as you expand the scale of what you're doing. So like obviously a particular trade deal, you probably have a lot more of an idea of what that's going to do with your relations between one country or another, whereas going to war with, say, China would have so many potential consequences that it would really be just laughable to try and predict, how this will play out in terms of the political ramifications, So I feel like you got to be careful in the extent to which you're trying to engage one way or the other.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to go to a formal war with China. I think it would be more of like a tech war, so to speak, or a cyber war. And that was kind of his question. I don't know if you want to talk about that or get to a question you had in your chat, but basically his other question was the cyber war, and he was thinking that was going to be the next big conflict, at least for what Biden's going to have to deal with.
Oh yeah, for sure. Cyber warfare is an ever-growing concern that I believe the U.S. is, at least presently, is wholly unprepared to deal with. And it seems to be, at least to me, that the United States is trying to refocus some of its or the U.S. military is trying to refocus some of its attention towards that effort. I think, though, that we're just, whether it's a lack of brain power or a lack of specific manpower or lack of funding for whatever reason, the United States is on the back foot right now, and if it wishes to really address this growing issue, because it's going to become a growing issue, it's never going to become easier. It's always going to become more and more in depth and more difficult to contend with. I think the U.S. stands to benefit most if it tries to almost immediately try to refocus at least to some extent, its focus on addressing cyber warfare. So your chatter has that right, for sure. But that's not to say that military conflict isn't going to happen or would not happen.
Right, and as we become more as tech becomes more and more useful and more tech improvements happen, you're talking about a tech area, like everybody has an iPhone almost at this point, and the idea of governments wanting to get access to it and understand is something that's, I think, becoming more and more of what's happening rather than what's not happening. And from a government's perspective, that's something that you don't really want to happen now. You could say that maybe the government's already doing that, and we don't necessarily know if you want to take a conspiracy perspective. But basically my whole point here is, as we get more and more technical, the idea of the way we fight with countries changing makes a lot of sense, because we're more than likely not to get into a mass-scale war because of how many countries have nukes. So what is going to be the alternative? And I think the alternative is turning more and more towards a tech and cybersecurity perspective.
Of course. Let me just quickly say thank you for the follow, man. I really appreciate it. They're Emeritus? I'm butchering that name. I'm so sorry. But thank you for the follow, man. I appreciate it. Yeah, obviously the extent to which the United States is going to be engaging in obviously it is still the nuclear deterrence idea, whatever, is still there. The mutually assured destruction from a game theory perspective, still obviously the best thing to do is just not fire. Wars by proxy is still going to be a big deal. Cyber warfare is going to become an increasing issue. However, due to the fact that there really hasn't been a war waged against nations with nukes or active nuclear weapons, I think is going to be an interesting constraining limit on how nations will try to engage with each other, especially if you buy into the U.S. Sino wars in theories. That's anywhere from like mid-late 2030s to early to mid-2040s.
Yeah, you just have the whole idea of mutually assured destruction. Anyway, sorry, go on.
No, you're good. So obviously, if you buy into some of those theories, we'll just have to see how that goes. Because obviously, there's a lot of people who believe in the idea of bounded rationality, and that we are not maximizing everything to the in the most correct or proper way, which is why you can lead to which is why we will see suboptimal decisions being made, or or why nations would take things that we would probably say doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So there's still very much a possibility wherein a nation could use a nuclear weapon if a war were to happen, but the optimal thing to do would be to not use it. But I don't know. We'll just have to see. First war, who wants to drop the nukes? We'll just have to wait and see.
I mean, eventually it's probably going to come.
I highly... Yeah, by nature of there being nukes. I would like to see there be a deproliferation, like massive wide scale, so that way we don't have nukes, so that way somebody can't, accidentally put a simulation into the NORAD computer, and then suddenly we believe that we're on like DEFCON 2, and the president's taken into Air Force One, or was it the general? I think it was like a leading general and a VP. But basically, our it was like back in the 70s, I think. No, 70s or 80s. There was an incident where some dude literally just stuck a war tape into a computer in the NORAD system, and so NORAD was essentially going through a simulation of if the Russians had launched all of their nuclear weapons, and so everything was getting scrambled. I think we were on like DEFCON 2, and so it was because of a general who basically said, "Let's wait a minute," and everybody realized that, oh, oops, somebody just left the tape in the computer, which is why we almost had a nuclear Armageddon. So even if everything is all said and done, there's still that potential for human error that's gonna cause nuclear annihilation. So I think it'd almost be just better to get rid of it, but hey, it's whatever, I guess.
Yeah, you would think, not to get too sidetracked, but you would think there would be some sort of environmentalist who would be like a mass hacker or some sort of like mass chemist or whatever it would be, and be able to like get into these systems and basically like deteriorate the nukes or make the nukes like useless. You would think that would have happened by now, maybe, but maybe the cybersecurity for that is beyond anything we could really imagine from just a regular civilian's perspective.
We can hope, man. We can certainly hope. I really do want to see. I really do hope that they have really special keys and chains and locks to keep us from total wiping out of our species.
You would think they would be smart enough for that.
So. Yeah, you hope so. But I think earlier, did you want to talk about money and politics, I believe?
Yeah, that was one kind of thing I wanted to get your opinion on. And I think we're going to have the same opinion, really, on this. Because I know that you're... Well, I don't want to put words in your mouth either, but you're left-leaning, at least, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm left, yeah.
And I've never really was ultra-conservative. Now I would say that I'm probably conservative but lean libertarian. I haven't really gone full libertarian yet. There's still a couple of things that I don't necessarily agree 100% with, but that's kind of where I am now on the political spectrum, as far as that goes. But anyway, the main thing I wanted to talk about with money and politics, and really it's kind of the same thing, is lobbyists. I just kind of wanted to hear your perspective on lobbyists.
I think fundamentally I don't have a problem with lobbying, in that you want to be able to go to and talk to, or you want to have interest groups being able to express their particular opinions to legislators, obviously the bureaucracy is limited in the amount of information that it has as well. So I think if you, as a member of MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, if you have specific interests that are saying, hey, we want to see better regulations on either car manufacturers, better, more stringent regulations on alcohol consumptions because, we want to see less of our children dying because of drunk driving. I don't have an issue in that you are going to either these bureaucrats or you're going to these particular legislators, and you're basically trying to make your case in that, hey, I think that you should try to vote on a policy this way or that way. Obviously, there are a lot of problems with it in that your larger sectoral organizations are going to have disproportionately have a shit ton of power. Sectoral being like your businesses, so like your massive agriculture, your pharmaceutical companies, your general like corporate what have yous, are going to have a disproportionate level of power. But I think like that's more of a failure in the policy execution, not necessarily in the idea itself, if that makes any sense. Because obviously there are certain interests and ideas that will only affect certain members of the population. Again, I used Madden as an example. You could have something like the NAACP, the ACLU, whatever. There are so many different special interest groups that extend to just beyond the sectoral, that I feel like it makes sense to have these groups which are representing certain or these organizations representing certain groups or constituents who are trying to advocate for certain ideas or policies to better represent a specific issue or problem. Like AARP is trying to represent the retired, the elderly retired people, right?
Right, yeah.
It said AAA is representing auto safety standards. And so these are, I think fundamentally lobbying isn't wrong, but there's definitely a disproportionate level of power in which certain groups will have far more over other groups. And we have attempted to, or in the past there have been attempts to try and address these sorts of issues, but oftentimes they'll either fall short in one, either like the House or the Senate, or it gets struck down by the Supreme Court on whatever grounds, typically going to be through freedom of expression. People can express their political interests, and if that is through donations to particular campaigns, then that's fine, Lamau. But again, fundamentally, I don't have a problem with it. I just have a problem with the execution as it currently stands.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's several perspectives I have with lobbyists. Oh, I'm sorry, you were going?
Sure. No, you go ahead.
Oh, okay, sorry. The biggest things about lobbyists in particular, like I'll do like a pro and con and go from there. The pro of lobbyists is oftentimes they can be more experienced with what like interest group they're trying to lobby for. So if you're trying to pass a new bill or trying to do something for that interest group or those industry, like let's just say the oil industry or whatever you want to pick, it would make sense sometimes to use lobbyists because they have more experience in what actually to put in the bill or what to do in particular to better the situation. So that's one advantage that sometimes lobbyists can have.
Sure. Yeah.
Now, to play devil's advocate on that is sometimes lobbyists don't understand what the impact of that bill could mean. They understand what the impact for their interest group is, but not necessarily the impact it will have on the actual citizens being impacted by this new law or new restriction or whatever it might be. And that's where a lot of times I feel like senators, good senators, should know more about how that bill would impact than a lobbyist would. But there's a lot of senators, I think, that don't necessarily take the perspective of what it might mean anyway. So if you have to almost play perfect politics for a senator to understand what his constituents believe, if I'm making sense there.
Yeah, I understand. Um, Obviously, one of the questions is it the job of that particular lobbyist to really know or care how it's going to affect other areas? Usually, it's like they don't care. But the thing is that we will often, if not almost always, see counter lobbying groups. So, like when you see major corporations try to lobby for, say, like deregulation of environmental protections, you'll oftentimes see environmental organizations then begin to arise to try to challenge these. Obviously, the major issue is their respective power and whether or not you're going to say like, oh, the corporation has a distinctly greater advantage in that they have far more money to give, and so maybe that helps them to buy bills, because that's something that can happen. Is that is that a lot of times there are a lot of bills that come through that aren't even really written by particular legislators. They're handed to them by these particular groups. And obviously, when you have a disproportionate amount of power being vested into, say, like BP or other oil companies, obviously it's going to be a lot harder for a clean energy organization trying to counter advocate for, say, don't pass this bill, it sucks. Obviously, the gas interest group, or the oil interest group, is going to be a lot more charitable to itself than it may let on. But I mean, I feel like there probably be ways, there have been ways to try to address this kind of issue. But again, oftentimes it either fails in one legislative body or the other, or it'll just won't get through the Supreme Court will strike it down. The Supreme Court will strike it down. So I mean, obviously there's a lot of issues that we can see arise from this, but so really I feel like if we want to keep our current system but address these issues, you're gonna have to start going, okay, are we gonna make an amendment to the Constitution to allow for certain, like, to make there be a limit on the amount of campaign donations? Are we going to put or anything like that? So, or are we just going to try to run through as many is it FEC? Hold on a second. Let me check really quick. I've got some notes here. FECA. Are we going to run through like FECA like bills and just keep trying to push them through and see what can stick? But I mean, where we are presently, we are in not a good position to try and really address a lot of these issues.
Right, because oftentimes these money and politics.
Fundamentally, I don't have a problem with.
No, keep going. I'm sorry.
You go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, oftentimes the money and politics
I'm basically done. You go ahead.
Get passed through campaign finances, as you were kind of just saying. And in my research I was doing with lobbyists, is that a lot of times when they're trying to not even really hide where they're sending money to or interest groups to, it's just through campaign financing. So it's kind of a weird thing, mm-hmm. And really you have to change the entire way American elections are done if you want to get rid of an interest group doing that, because there's always claims about how an interest group owns a certain senator, maybe like the oil industry or the war industry we were just talking about earlier, owns a certain person because they donated a ridiculous amount to their campaign.
Yeah. Obviously, I don't know. I feel like a lot of it's going to. That you also have to be aware of, like, certain certain industries will have better access to particular representatives because they may represent constituents in a certain area. Like obviously, coal miners or those particular interest groups are going to be a lot more effective to people in Pennsylvania, given the fact that a lot of Pennsylvanians have jobs there. They have a lot of power in that particular state, and so obviously that particular congressman is probably going to be much more apt to try to listen to that particular organization over others because it represents their constituents, right? Or at least a big chunk of their constituents. And I think, like I'm trying to say is the ultimate issue is that something that I learned in one of my classes, and I've kind of taken this one to heart, is this idea that money is like water and that it always slips through the cracks. Like, regardless of the extent to which we have attempted to try and regulate or otherwise constrain the flow of money in U.S. elections or what have you, it's always managed to just find new ways to try and slip through those particular regulations. Now, maybe the solution is just to literally make it so goddamn home tight where nothing can escape. But that's going to take a while, and you're going to have to be fighting through, Supreme Court the entire time. So it's definitely a very, very difficult issue. I mean, Congress has tried this multiple times. You've got the Tillman Act, the Federal Corrupt Practices Act of 1925, the Hatch Act, all of which was beaten by committees or through corporations creating bonuses being given to key corporate executives during election years to make personal donations to campaigns, and just general lack of enforcement. You saw the FECA, the 1971 Revenue Act, got the 1974 amendments to the FECA, and then you had a lot of that being challenged by Buckley v. Vallejo, and other similar Supreme Court rulings or federal court rulings. And then I think one of your most recent things was the 2002 Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act, the bill sponsored by the McCain and Feingold, which essentially tried to ban soft money and restrict time advocacy ad contributions by PACs and give free TV time to candidates willing to limit their spending. Trying to in turn limit the amount that you should reasonably be taking or accepting from a given donor or lobbyist. And it was upheld in 2003, but then you started having it being stripped away in 2007, 2009, and then 2010 with Citizens United, and that's kind of where we are now. It's so much of it has just been blown apart. I think to fundamentally have a change, you're going to need to change Supreme Court. You have to get an entirely new set of Supreme Court justices who would be willing to toss out that or a lot of these precedents. So, which is very hard, especially whenever you go back to something like Buckley v. Vallejo, which has stood for as long as it has. It's going to be tough, man, and it's very, very difficult. And so, I mean, that's about my only way through that I could really recommend, or that I could really see. I hope that helps to clarify some of this stuff. I know I kind of just gish galloped you right there with all of these bills and stuff like that, but it's just a very complex something.
It's good information to have, because lobbying is becoming, well, it becomes a big issue, I feel like, every election cycle. Just because people didn't learn how much interest groups give candidates. But like I was just saying before, and I've talked about this with my co-host on a stream I do every Thursday with them, where we talked about lobbyists, and his whole perspective was basically that you would have to change the entire way political elections work in order for lobbyists to have a lesser impact on how government works now. Because he was taking the perspective that lobbyists are something it's a necessary evil, but it's become bigger than it ever should have been. Was kind of his stance
For
on
sure,
lobbying.
for sure. Oh, definitely. Like what we've seen, even in the last decade, we've seen money in politics like almost exponentially skyrocket. Like I think this past election, like here in 2020, it was like the most amount of money into both like a Senate race and in the presidential election, and it just seems to be continuously growing and growing and growing because a lot of political scientists will tell you is that typically the campaign that tends to spend more tends to win more often. So you have a lot of data that supports these ideas, and there's so much that goes into the whole thing. Um, in terms of like changing the overall election, um, I suppose I don't know specifically what it is that he would recommend have happen, but I could definitely see that as being one potential option to address it. I see it to be also very unlikely. Um,
Hmm.
um, and that you may have better, depending on the extent to which he's saying that you're going to completely rearrange um, uh, spending or like how you're going to rearrange the election system. Like I don't know if he just means like just make it uh, a plurality rule or ranked choice voting. I don't know if like that's what he means by change, or if he just means some other fundamental change in how we conduct our elections. So I won't like really try to put too much. I won't try to put words in his mouth. And obviously, he sounds like a relatively intelligent person. From my perspective, I'm not trying to be mean or anything.
Yeah,
Sorry,
no,
sorry,
no.
co-host. I'm not trying to be mean or anything.
You know,
Uh,
he takes I call it a radical approach because I never see it happening, but it makes a lot of sense in a lot of ways. He takes a blind election approach in that you don't know what party the candidate's from and what they look like. You just have to look at their policies and what they say, but you don't know what they look like and you don't know what party they're from or anything like that. That's one thing he always suggests for how elections should be run.
like I've seen the like you don't know the name. You're just going for the candidate for their particular policies.
Yes. You don't know their party. You only know their name. You don't know what they look like. Basically, you just know their name and their policies. And he says, yes, there still would be debates, but you wouldn't see who they were. It would basically be like, I don't know, a live stream, but they would only have like a badge or something. I don't know. It would be blank screens. So you don't know what they would look like, but you would still be able to know their policies. I guess you would be able to hear them at that point, but,
I was gonna
that
say
type
a
of thing.
lot of you're you're also becoming like I see I think that'd be extremely difficult, especially with the advent of social media, to keep quiet who the presidential candidates are. Um, I this sounds like this seems like even more Herculean than uh trying to just change up like the Supreme Court. Um,
So I say
say
it's a radical
it
idea.
sounds it sounds yeah it sounds reminiscent of the secret ballot, and but usually there they would try to attach um uh they just would remove like the D versus the R on the end of the name, right?
Right,
And they
yeah.
would try to, so that way you're trying to encourage people to vote certain ways. And and you'll have to forgive me, I can't remember what a lot of the research on that said, but I feel like there were reasons why you don't really, or why the US doesn't really do that. um I just can't remember at the time, so I apologize.
No, no, you're good.
um um yeah, like in between like advent of social media and like hoping that these candidates don't get leaked, if you had your party taking up like one singular position, like you say this is my position, or this is the position of our party, and then you would just be able to say like that's me, or again say like this is me just throwing this out here. um if you what if you like put out like how specific in terms of policy do you want them to be? So like uh, a Republican candidate would just say pro-choice, or sorry, would say pro-life, versus the Democrat would say pro-choice. usually most people would be able to say like, oh, it's that one or the other one. So I mean, depending on how nitty gritty, how much you want to really get into the weeds on specific policies, um, that could potentially have an effect on the effectiveness of your secret ballot. And also, I feel like you're really hoping that um, your voting block is going to be motivated to one, go out and read and give the time commitment to try to understand each policy and then try to weigh them heuristically. Obviously, that would be nice, but I think with the general lack of people's investment and motivation to care about politics and the increasing level of just I only care about what the headline is, or at least that's a personal opinion from what I am generally kind of throwing out there to see. That's not like a specifically um, like a mathematically proven point, right? That's just a generalization.
Right. Yeah.
Is that it just seems like we have a general lack of interest, and so I think to add increased levels of information cost, and potentially an increase in time costs may de-incentivize people or disincentivize people from um, uh, going out in the first place. Obviously, the voters may be more informed when they would get there, but you're hoping that they'll read through thoroughly. So if you want it to be very hyper specific, again, you're probably going to have to be like picking and choosing which points you want to have coming first. And then if the candidate was just hammering that idea home for the entire election, then so be it. Obviously, it would be. I'm curious if there would still be a primary for either candidates, or if it would just be some new. The party will just elect a candidate, or like going back to an older style. But would the people know who they're voting for then? And if that's the case, would they have their specific policies laid out there? And if that's the case, then you have people just saying, vote this way, and the only thing you've really done is just try to get out the lowest of low information voters, which again might be good, but then again may also disproportionately affect certain people. So
Yeah, because one of the biggest problems the United States voting has in general is the low turnout rate. So affecting turnout rate with a system like that could be super detrimental. But I know that he also kind of takes the perspective that he really thinks that voters should be educated on who they're voting for, because he really doesn't like the people that go out and vote by party lines and don't know about why they're voting and what stance they have or anything. It's just because, hey, my parents were Democrat. Hey, I'm Democrat. Let me vote Democrat. He really hates those type of voters, because he's like, we really need to know who we're voting for.
He probably hates the majority of voters then.
Oh yeah, yeah. So I think that's why
the majority of voters
will
vote. Say majority of voters will vote on partisan lines. Like it is the single best indicator of how you will vote is how you identify with a party. So if you identify with one, you are extremely likely to just vote for that party. And so I get his want for like to remove the low information voter. But I understand the want for all of the people who are voting to be very informed. But the problem then becomes like, are you stepping onto ideas of popular sovereignty? Is that in certain ways discriminatory towards certain people who may not have access to X, Y, or Z forms of information? People who may not have all the time to be particularly informed on a specific issue. Like it just general like information, transportation, time costs, all these sorts of things. And whether or not if you would incorporate something like that, would you in turn start to see the wants and needs of people with more access to those previously mentioned forms of information? Would you see those people begin to have only their interests be represented, and then therefore I'm just saying it may not necessarily be 100% true, but I'll just throw it out as being elitist. Would you start to see the people who are more informed and who are going to be more willing to care about politics showing out? And if that's the case, then you're going to start to see a greater differentiation between the political elite versus the non. And I say elite, it can be informed. You can say like the politically informed versus not. And is that really representative of the wants and needs of Americans? And so that's kind of everybody just kind of throws their hands up and goes, you know. So while political scientists will oftentimes long for an informed population, they're very hesitant to try to advocate for like policies that would restrict people's access to be able to vote or otherwise, whatever have you. But again, maybe it's because it could be argued that it's a structurally disadvantageous or discriminatory for certain groups of people or for specific people. But I'm just completely just throwing out what I think he might be talking about. And if I'm completely wrong, co-host, I apologize, and I will admit I am completely wrong. So yeah, please don't hate me.
You know, it would be interesting if you ever wanted to do another interview. If you doing one with him would probably be rather interesting, because he's a very philosophical guy and he knows a lot about politics as well. So I think y'all two would have a pretty good conversation if you ever wanted to do another kind of conversation, and maybe you could talk about that or whatever else y'all wanted to.
Sure. Does he have does he have a background in political science? Like, is he did he study in political science?
I don't believe he has a background in political science. He knows a lot about it. He knows a lot about philosophy. I don't really know what his formal background is in. I know right now he does a lot of like tax stuff, so maybe it's in like accounting or something like that. But he knows a whole bunch about philosophy and a whole lot about politics. But I can send you his stuff. He doesn't have a Twitch. He just has a YouTube. But
sure, that'd be nice. After the stream, yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We can see about talking sometime and go from there.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I was trying to think. Because I also want to hit this off. I don't know if you have anybody in your chat or anything like that may be talking to you, but an argument that this is kind of going back to our talks of money and politics and stuff like that, is an argument I will oftentimes hear is the idea of term limits, or cutting funding or for particular or for the legislature or representatives or whoever have you. And I gotta push back on that one, because hold on just one second. Anything that I have ever spoken to any any of my professors or anybody like that, or any research that I've read, has generally suggested that you really don't want to increase term limits, because you oftentimes will see and by increasing term limits, I mean like you have, instead of like 6 years, it's 1 year, right? That's what I mean when I say increasing term limits.
Yeah, you're increasing a number of them. I gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like making each person's like term be a much shorter, or not allowing a person to run for office after they've been in political office for X many years is another one that I've heard, which is also not great, because extremely often we will see, hold on a second. I had literally done an entire presentation about this for my chat, because I kept getting the question, term limits. Here we go. Just one second. So yeah, the question was essentially, should we increase term limits? What are the effects to begin with? Are they good or bad? I made this pretty brief because I wanted it to be really easy and digestible for people. But essentially, theoretically, term limits would spread out the power, but empirically, it isn't necessarily the case. Theoretically, the idea is, oh, well, now that you have less time to be in office, you're going to keep getting in new people with fresh ideas and fresh perspectives who are going to keep or be better representative of the electorate. But in actuality, you tend to see people. It shifts the need for or the primary drive of elected officials away from re-election and more towards what can I get. So originally, their number one factor or their number one driving factor is I want to get reelected, right? And so after you would increase these specific term limits, you say, okay, well, now I have X amount of years to get in here and get the most amount of crap that I ever want or that I can ever get. I believe we saw this try to happen in Mexico and Brazil. Or maybe it was Argentina. It was something like this. But essentially, we ended up seeing like greater levels of corruption, of people being politicians being bought off because you have shifted their utility away from getting reelected and towards getting the most monetary gain that they can in that limited amount of time. And when you do that, also interest groups become more powerful because now you don't have specific senators or people like that who are going to have more lasting power and who are going to be able to push back against, say, like the tobacco industry or whatever, what have you. That in turn, in order to get because the longer you're in these particular fields, you're going to be much more you're going to become much more knowledgeable about any given issue, and so whenever you keep having new people, you keep having these new people have to learn brand new information that can be a lot more watered down and a lot more charitable than would happen if they try to present the same sort of information on a person who's voted on bills regarding a certain industry for like 50 years, right? And also that the cost to buy bills drops radically after the passage of stricter term limits. So again, like you're much more politicians become much more inclined to take the money or to be much more open to just passing through or pushing through whatever legislation is given to them, because it's not like they know, right?
Right, yeah.
They don't know. They have a very limited amount of time to be in office, so these companies now get to pay even less money to try and buy out these particular representatives, and so it's generally not a good idea for certain factors or for certain I don't know even know what you would call it, for like certain people, for representatives, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's essentially what that is. That is to say that like term limits should be completely done away with. Obviously, we also want to make there be frequent and fair elections, but checks and balances, pros and cons, you got to weigh all of them and all of them together as they form a greater, more cohesive whole. So.
Well, also the whole funny thing about term limits, and no, you're fine, you're good. Well, one of the funny things I find about term limits is the factor of people vote for the candidate that is already in office. So there's, in theory, yes, a candidate could change if they're found corrupt or whatnot, but most of the time these government officials aren't necessarily found as being corrupt. They just there for a long time. So the whole perspective I have is I don't really trust the American people, even if there were term limits, in voting for different people. They would just vote for someone very similar to who is already there, and the whole system just keeps going. I don't think that term limits are going to solve that issue. The other thing that's a little bit kind of funny about term limits is experience does matter when it comes to government, especially Yeah, experience matters very much when it comes to government and any job for that matter. So I do want somebody who knows what to do, knows the system, is experienced, knows bills that worked, bills that didn't, had his successes, didn't have his successes. You know, somebody who's gone through the system. There is some truth to that claim, and it can be good. So if you just do a strict version of term limits and have nobody who's experienced in the position because they just keep getting overturned and overturned and overturned, I don't really think that that's going to help either.
Sorry, I'm just shifting my green screen right now for a second. It's just kind of having a little issues.
Oh no, you could. Yeah, I had to shut down my stuff because I noticed I was buffering pretty bad, but I think it's gotten a lot better now. So
Yeah, your mic is sounding a lot better. I'm noticing. Um, yeah, I think that's a little bit better. No, that's worse. Oh well, whatever. I don't care. It's fine. Yeah. So like what you were speaking to was obviously like incumbent advantage. Like these people tend to get reelected for many reasons, like whether it's just like general name recognition or retrospective voting, where people will go and they'll say, well, how am I doing now as opposed to X many years ago? And like generally people are going to be more fine with the status quo because so long as it hasn't drastically affected them, it's nothing's broken, nothing is fundamentally falling apart at the seams, and it's not affecting me that much directly. So you're seeing, I think you're doing a good job. So yeah, there's a whole lot. It's just generally the incumbency advantage is an often talked about reason why you will see so many representatives or senators continuously getting their own or getting reelected. And one of the reasons why you tend to see incumbents win so much is because when an incumbent is going to lose, they tend not to run.
right, yeah.
So it tends to kind of skew the data, and this has been recognized and is, like generally agreed upon. Like, yeah, that happens a lot. So we you oftentimes will see that kind of stuff happening. So yeah, incumbency advantage in electoral politics. It's rough, man. It's really rough.
Yeah, I've seen several studies on incumbent advantage. It's a very big thing, especially in U.S. politics.
Oh, are you? Oh, yeah. Just for a second, I was like, are you American or?
No, I'm American. Yeah, I just
Yeah,
I've studied foreign
yeah.
politics too. So
Yeah. Capital. Yeah. So, were there any other specific ideas or issues like that you really want to go over or talk about?
no, we went through all the list I
So I feel
had
like we've covered
for questions.
extensive...
I'm sorry, go.
Oh no, it was if there are any like questions or anything like that you want to get into, I think we've covered pretty expansive, and I understand if you want to if you want to dig more deeply into specific issues, we can do that if you'd like. Did we ever talk about Biden's domestic policy and what is that we think that he's going to be trying to focus on for the next 4 years?
Oh, sort of. We kind of
'Cause I
jumped
think we did.
to.
I think I did foreign policy.
Yeah, we started on domestic, kind of, and then it bled into to foreign before we kind of finished on domestic.
Yeah, sorry. I'm much more. My schooling is based on um, uh, international relations. So I have a major and hopefully this semester going to be getting a degree in political science and international relations. So like IR stuff tends to be my point of focus whenever I'm doing this sort of stuff. So I apologize if it's if it was a bit skewed.
No, no, you're fine.
aside from that, is there anything else that you really want to talk about?
I covered everything that I had kind of on my list. I don't know if you have any questions for me or anything, but I covered everything I was thinking of discussing about with you.
Think, if nothing else, I think that may be good.
Alrighty then. I'll let you continue with your stream there. But just before we leave off here, uh, just a live thing. If you ever want to do this again, I'm perfectly willing to. I enjoyed what we discussed about here.
Yes, of course. Um, I would love to have more discussions like this. It's good getting to actually talk about like these general ideas and concepts, and not just having it be a bunch of idiots screaming at me, telling me why we need like to bring back child labor. So
Yeah, Twitch can be a very hostile place sometimes.
Twitch, Twitch has some really interesting takes. I could tell you that much.
Yes.
Um, as I'm sure you're aware, yeah.
Yeah, some epic
Um,
trolls.
Yeah, we gotta love it when they bring in the Holocaust denying and stuff like that. So, yikes! I don't actually know if I'm following you on Twitch presently, but I'll make sure to do that.
I'll do the same. I'll make sure. I think I already
There you
am
go.
with you, but
Yeah, I
I'll
think you
make
already are.
sure.
My bad. I totally left you out. I'm so sorry, man. That's rude of me.
No, you're good, but thanks for the
Very rude.
follow.
Yeah, no problem. Um, but yeah. So I appreciate it. Thank you for having me out. Do you want to go ahead and you can plug your channel and your information
Oh yeah, of
on my
course.
stream?
Yeah, I'm the breakdown with Birkenhoff on YouTube. I'm also on D Live and obviously Twitch at the breakdown with WB. Uh, I have a couple of YouTube videos I released lately. One's over the Green New Deal, actually, and my perspectives on it. Another one is over a documentary. So if you're a fan of documentary or you're an anarchist yourself, I'm not an anarchist, but I give a perspective of an anarchy film. So if you like documentaries, you like film, or you're an anarchist, you might like my latest video I did on that. So you can just check out my YouTube, which is the breakdown with Birkenhoff. If you want to follow me, the best place is probably to go to my Twitch channel and join my Discord or Twitter. I try to stay active on both of those to update people on when I go live or any other thing I have going on. So thank you very much for doing this interview, and I'll let you plug your stuff on my end, and then we'll go.
Okay. So yeah, my name is Scoots. Scootz314 is my Twitch user handle. You can find me at on Twitter at Scootz3141. Some other jackass had taken 314. I don't know why. Um, Apparently 314 is a surprisingly popular number, as is Scoots, but I don't know. But obviously, you can come onto my channel. You can join my Discord. You just type !Discord and you can join. Aside from that, I I'm looking to probably expand into like Instagram because I know a lot of people like that. Oh, and obviously you can follow me on my YouTube page. Completely took down my friggin' YouTube link. Oh, I'm so bad. Anyways, you can find me over at what is it? I can't remember what my freaking channel name is. At Scootz314. I've uploaded a few videos. I've got a lot of videos that basically I'm ready to just upload, or um, or just essentially in the works or have finished. But I'm hoping to actually start providing a lot more content here soon, just as soon as I get my video editing software to work out, because right now it's causing me a lot of pains and difficulties.
Yeah,
But as soon
editing
as I
is
get
a
that, I'll figure out
rascal.
I'm getting it. Yeah, I don't know what video editing software you use. I use DaVinci Resolve, um, and I've just upgraded to the new um, um, to the new 17.0 beta, and it's just really struggling with some very basic issues. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, follow me at Scootz314 for my YouTube. Scootz314 is my Twitch or is my Twitter name, and obviously I'm Scootz314 here on Twitch. So those are the main places you can find me. Yeah, appreciate you for having me on here, man.
Yeah, no problem. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I had a great time. Hope to talk to you again, and maybe later you can send me the link to person that you were uh, the to your co-host and
It's a ghost.
stuff
Yeah.
like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll definitely check out some more of your videos, and so I can watch some of that go. So it'll be really fun.
Alrighty. Thank you again.
All right, perfect. Thank you for coming up, or thank you for having me, man.
Alrighty. So that was our discussion there. And I don't see anybody on the platforms. I had to exit out of my Twitch account, or sorry, of my chat screens because I was noticing a very large buffer. And I think that that is a major problem with trying to stream from my monitor, which I don't know exactly why it's doing that. So I'm going to try a different setup for the next time I go live, which may be tomorrow. I haven't decided quite yet. And hopefully I'll solve that buffering issue for in the future. Because it is very odd that it does that. But I think I know why. So I don't see anybody on my Twitch chat because that's the only thing I have up right now. So I'm going to go ahead and end the stream here because that's all I was kind of thinking about doing. And I got some stuff to finish for tonight for homework, so I don't want to be late on assignments. So I appreciate anybody who stopped by for everything. I highly appreciate all of you guys. Thank you very much for stopping by. I don't know why it did that. There it goes. Alrighty, once again, thank you.